Staying with this story, our Chase team has reached Roland Paris in Ottawa. He is director of the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa, also former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Roland, if you had the ear of the Prime Minister now, what would be your advice as he prepares for more important meetings?
Well, I think it's the same advice for every member of NATO, which is that Russia poses a clear and present danger to European security. I don't think there's any immediate risk of the fighting spilling over beyond Ukraine at all. But this invasion, this unprovoked invasion, massive invasion of Ukraine, which, as your reporter just noted, the deployments so far point towards an operation that's intended to neutralize the entire Ukrainian armed forces and to install a puppet regime in Ukraine, that this represents a major escalation in Russia's aggressiveness in Ukraine. And right now, every NATO member and other countries need to be imposing costs on Vladimir Putin, and NATO in particular needs to be reinforcing all of its members in Eastern Europe and in the Baltics to reassure those members that NATO has its back and to send a message to Putin that NATO will not tolerate any interference of any kind within NATO, and that NATO and other countries will be imposing significant costs on Putin for what he's already done.
Roland, one of the things we just had on our news network was the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, Vadim Prystaiko. He was suggesting that the big ask is going to be something only NATO can provide, and that would be a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Do you think that will be on the table? Is that a discussion the leaders in NATO will be having and perhaps say, okay?
Well, of course, the Ukrainian government wants all the help it can get, and ideally it would want NATO to be fighting in Ukraine against Russia. But that's something that NATO countries, starting with the United States, have indicated all along. They're not going to fight a war against Russia in Ukraine. And I'm afraid a no-fly zone would be an act of war that would involve combat with Russian forces, aerial forces over Ukraine. So I very much doubt that that's in the cards. However, the NATO alliance will be meeting as requested under Article 4, and NATO does have rapid response forces. It has been in the process of reinforcing its presence on its eastern flank. I should say also that the discussion of sanctions ongoing today, it'll be important to see what comes out of that. I very much hope that we're going to see sanctions, the likes of which we've never seen before, including cutting off all Russian banks from the entire international financial system, imposing restrictions on exporting high technology to Russia, among other things. And I would expect that covertly it will be possible for some countries to continue to support a resistance within Ukraine should there continue to be a resistance.
So do you not take it seriously then, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, saying if you impose this and do this, then there will be dangers like you have never seen before?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that what he's making clear is that attempting to intervene within this conflict, that Russia is basically indicating Putin is indicating that he's all in. So this is why, partly why the idea of a no-fly zone is something that would be very problematic for NATO at this time. Putin will continue to escalate and escalate and escalate. If we don't want to fight a war with Russia in Ukraine, then that's the reality that we're facing.
Final question for you, Roland. We talk about the things that countries, that NATO, that organizations, the UN, et cetera, should do. What would be a big mistake right now?
Well, a big mistake would be to hope that this is it, that this is all that Putin is going to do, that, once he has control, if he gains control of Ukraine, that, his resentments will have been resolved and that he will no longer pose a threat to the rest of Europe. And I think it's quite clear right now, based on his behavior over the past decade, frankly, that he is aiming to reconstitute a kind of version of the Russian Empire, that he is extremely resentful towards the West, extremely resentful and scornful of the idea that Ukrainians should be able to decide their own way. But he's also fearful of democracy movements, and he's going to continue to try to disrupt and divide and undermine and demoralize democracy in Europe and beyond, and we need to defend ourselves against that.
Strong words. Roland, we'll talk again. I thank you for your time. You be well.